I've seen things done to people that are absolutely horrific. Even describing, I think, would haunt many listeners.
My grandfather had been a doctor. My father was a doctor. And so I felt very confused whether I was doing this for me or I was doing this for them.
What people need to understand, given our current situation in the Middle East, is that they need to take all of their preconceived notions about how you interact with another human being that you know and park it.
These stories matter because it's not a video game.
If you hold people to 110% expectation and they deliver 95, they still come out ahead, because if you only expected 100, they were likely going to give you 85.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Life of Flow. Today, we are really honored to have Erin Moore. Erin Moore is a vascular surgeon who came to us really highly referred as a great storyteller. And guess what? He did not disappoint. We had so much stuff to talk about, and we really wanted to end up talking about his company, but quite frankly, we ended up just talking about life and a lot of stories about his time in the Marines. I think it's a great show, and it's going to be part 1 of 2, so we'll have him back to actually dive into the founder entrepreneur side of his latest part of his life. Enjoy the show as much as we hopefully do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Life of Flow podcast. And today we have Dr. Erin Moore to come give us his entrepreneurial journey and story, which I'm sure all you guys would like and be inspired by. Erin, welcome.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'll preface by saying, one of the cool things about this show is that the people that have been kind enough to listen in, the people that have been kind enough to on occasion enjoy a show on the road, and understand a little bit of what we do and what we are and how our chemistry, they will actually come up to you and say, hey man, I like what you guys are doing. You know who a really cool guy for your show is this guy or this gal or this person, right? And so it's really cool because it's created connections that before we didn't have. I mean, I think Erin, you and I have been maybe at some meeting in passing, maybe potentially on some podium here or there, but we really never interacted deeply. And I certainly didn't know half of the things that I know about you now after doing a little bit of research and on your bio. But shout out to Scott Nelson, my boy in Florida, who hooked us up. And I say that because there's like 3 Scott Nelsons in this business, but you know who you are. And for those that know Scott, he's a stud, always networking and always connecting. And he was the one that said, you know what? Erin and you and Lucas are going to put together a pretty cool show. So that's why we're here, guys. And I appreciate you sharing some time, Erin, this morning to just throw some shit around here.
Absolutely. You betcha, man.
So, one of the things that I love doing on the first, because I hope this is just the first of many, is understanding your journey, right? Your journey in this world of vascular care. And you can accelerate or decelerate in whatever part you want. I want to take about half of the show to understand your journey. Where'd you grow up? Why'd you go into med school? Why'd you decide vascular? And then we can start going into the military and some of the stuff you've done in the past and some interesting stories. So the floor is yours.
So I'm a middle income kid from the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. Was born in Annapolis, Maryland. My old man was a Naval Academy type, and
Cowboys fan?
No. Spent 25 years living in Dallas, rooting for the Washington Redskins.
Wow. Okay.
Oh yeah, man.
Got it.
You better be tough in Dallas if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So, because that's originally where I'm from, and that's where the family was, right? So, but
Okay.
grew up in Dallas, and I had a pretty nondescript, only child, right? Pretty nondescript upbringing. Went to public schools and did all that sort of thing, and never really. I was always bent towards scientific things. I remember as a kid watching, all the scientific programs on television back when television had like 4 channels that you could get your hands on, and watching like the old Carl Sagan's Cosmos and The Body Human and all these things, because I was fascinated by how that stuff worked, and so. I think that kind of fostered, I think my mother recognized that and had always kind of pushed me to try to push myself, towards those things that I found interesting. But I'll be honest with you, man, I came out of high school and started college with the idea that I was going to do something medical, something or other. But, I wasn't a straight A guy out of high school. I was more interested in chasing girls and getting in trouble, I think, than I was in working on my car, than I was necessarily in being an academic type. I mean, I had the wherewithal for it, just didn't have the drive because I didn't find anything at that point that was going to inspire me. So fast forward, get through the first semester of college, did well, get to the second semester of college, aced it, good GPA, kind of, on a bioscience kind of pathway. And I went to, I mean, I paid for college myself. I lived at home, with an arrangement with my parents to say, look, I'll come in and out as I want to come in and out. I won't disturb you, but you put a roof over my head and I'm going to pay for school and I'm going to take care of it. And that's what I did. I worked part-time jobs, waited tables at restaurants and whatnot. And then ended up, doing tutoring and substitute teaching, which was a great time as an undergrad. And so that was fun at a high school, but just to try to get through the process. And then, so the end of the second semester, I get done, stuff's doing well. And, I'm thinking about, well, I thought about biomedical engineering. I thought about, doing some sort of allied health thing, but just because I didn't really necessarily believe that I had the capability or the wherewithal, to do something any bigger than that. And I sat down with my grandfather, who was a corpsman in the Navy. He spent 72 hours straight with no sleep, mixing morphine syrettes in the basement at Hickam Airfield in the days after Pearl Harbor, because he was there. And just had always had a lot of respect for him. And my family's a Navy family. It goes all the way back, literally, to the USS Constitution. And so, that was always kind of that undercurrent as well. But, I remember sitting there and it was just one of those seminal moments that you have in your life. And you know what those are because you get a couple of them and they come to mind. And he sat there and he said, well, how's school going? And I told him, I said, it's going well. I really enjoy it. And he said, what do you think you're going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. And I kind of tossed around this and that and kind of, sort of half-assed notions of such and such and so and so. And he said, you're obviously smart, Aaron. He said, and you have a drive. Obviously, you found something that you're interested in here. He said, and you like people and you're good to talk to people and figure things out that way. He said, why don't you just go to medical school? And it was one of those sort of crystalline moments. Everything changed in that instant. Like I just needed somebody that I had respect for who had enough respect to help me say, you can do this. And he didn't have to say you can do it. He just said, why not do this? Just suggested it. And I never looked back. It was like, okay, now I have a goal. Now I have a drive. Now I have a way to get someplace.
Somebody that can look past the noise of youth, right? Because
And care enough
it's
about who I
very,
was as a person to know me to
you don't
say,
fucking
you can
know,
do
right?
this. Right.
Yeah, but also to look past the dumb stuff and say, kid, you've got some pretty cool attributes that placed in the right direction can propel something. And it was an aha moment.
Well, and how many times have the three of us all been in that situation now where we are now looking back and seeing those people, and you know how it is. You come across those people, you think that kid's got potential. I want that, him or her. I want them to work with me. You try to figure out a way to try to foster that and pass that, move that forward for somebody else because maybe they too are faltering and not quite sure. Just a little bit of something to go, yeah, just take the step, have some faith, and just do it. And that's all I needed. And then it was just, man, it was hell bent for leather from there, man. It was no looking back, and I was driven to get to medical school. Did I know what I wanted to do when I got into medical school? No. I mean, I started medical school. I started medical school thinking I was going to do something in primary care, just because my ex-wife, then my girlfriend, used to work with a primary care office, and I had seen what that interaction was like, and I liked the interaction with the people and the patients. Um, but you've by the time I hit surgical rotation the third year at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, it was like, oh man, this is it. This is. I remember, you know how it is when you're a medical student. Especially back then, you could still get up to the table, but I'm standing on a couple of lifts behind the boss, looking over his shoulder while they're doing this case with the senior resident. and they were doing like a right hammy or something. And I just remember in the middle of the case, and I'm just looking at it, and I went, that is just so fucking cool. And the whole room stopped, and I thought, oh God, what did I just do? And the staff guy starts laughing. And and the resident looks up at me like, shut up. And he's laughing. And he kind of turned and he said, it is pretty neat, isn't it? I said, this is it. This is what I want to, this is amazing. I want to do this. This is cool. You're identifying a problem, you're solving the problem, you're moving that patient on in life. You're moving on to the next problem to solve and onward. And I said, sign me up.
What was it? What was your moment like that, Miguel? Did you have a moment like that
In medicine or for vascular?
for surgery? Because you did you go straight into vascular in Costa Rica, or you?
You do. I was, as you were saying this, I was reminiscing on my path. The medical school one was very tricky for me because my grandfather had been a doctor, my father was a doctor, and so I felt very confused whether I was doing this for me or I was doing this for them. And I remember that being a really heavy burden at the time. And then, it was, to your point, it was my dad's one of my dad's best friends who's a vascular surgeon who has been a true inspiration in my life. Funnest guy in the world. This is the dude that comes to all the parties, brings the fucking guitar, animates the shit out of every party. He's like the definition of work hard, play hard. And I remember him looking at me, you know, he's like, it doesn't, because I remember saying, it's like, I love computer engineering. I love engineering in general. Um, I love biology and I love this and that. And I really like computers. So I think I should be a programmer. It was what I was telling him. And the dude's like, listen, all of this shit you're saying you could do by being a doctor. Like, it's just what you do with your career, right? You like to be a doctor and go into imaging. You like to be a doctor and go into gadgets. You could do it. And it just opens all the doors. Whereas if you want to program, you're always going to be programming and you're not ever going to have any other pathways. And that was my aha moment where I said, fuck, this is right. Like medical school, if I can get in, it's a path towards a freedom that I don't necessarily understand then, but his advice was spot on. Because today, anybody that asks me, I would say, I'm not sure that medicine is going to be that relevant in the next few years, but I can tell you that you can do a whole lot with it. Like it's this basis to go in any direction you want. And I remember the day that I had this cool aha moment in surgery. I remember as an intern, it was like day one, man, like day one. I just bought my first pair of scrubs, and we in the ED we had this little office where you would have to do essentially everybody would come and you would say, okay, you're bleeding, you have to go in. You've got some sniffles, you're staying out and sitting on the ground because this is the social security system of Costa Rica in the middle of downtown. So we would get somebody like with a knife, and then we'd get somebody with sniffles. And so you'd have to be out there on your first rotation. That's all you would do is you get to live. I think you can live. And that's what we would do. And I remember it was like day 2 or 3. And overhead, it was like Dr. Montero urgently to OR 7. And I for a minute I paused and I was like, holy shit, they need me. This is it. This is what I've been doing. My whole life was this. And bro, I remember I closed the front office of the hospital. Okay. Like nobody was doing anything out there. Nobody was triaging. I was a triage guy. And I'm like, I can't, you have to wait. And I run off and I could even like hear like dun dun chariots of fire. Dun 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 dun. Bro, and I'm running up the stairs. And I fucking kicked down the door and I fucking opened the door and everybody's silent like that day that you went into the OR and everybody looks at me. And I'm like, you called Dr. Montero to R7 and everybody fucking looks at me and they're like, yeah, who the fuck are you? And I'm like, well, Dr. Montero. They look at me, they're like, Dr. Montero, the chief of fucking surgery, idiot. And there's another Montero in the hospital who was like the attending of the ED. And for some reason, in my stupid head, I thought they were calling me, the guy that's in triage day 3. And at that day, I was like, okay, someday I'll be the real Montero. And this is kind of really cool. And it gave me a great serotonin push. So uh, I went down feeling like the dumbest idiot in the world. And for a year, I was a laughing stock, of course, of all the residency. I remember they made a journal called the Bozo the Clown Journal of Medicine. I made the front page of the Bozo the Clown Journal of Medicine, and it was really fun times. But anyway, not to digress.
Hey, if you're gonna
So
do it, go all
so
in, man.
you,
At least go all in. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I know. Anyway,
Give it 110%,
and
Miguel. I
so
love it. I love it.
yeah, fucking triage, and then I came back to triage. Everybody was so mad at me, and then the guy from the ED
Yeah,
was like, "What
get
the
back to
fuck? You
work.
left your post. You never leave triage." Blah blah blah. Anyway, I got into a whole lot of trouble. Also, plus the shame. It was great. It was a great. That was great. That was great. Anyway, Aaron, back to your story. So you had this aha moment, and that's what propelled you.
Yeah. So, get to medical school, stayed in Dallas, which is what I wanted to do, to go to UT Southwestern, working, with some really great people. And, and really, and of course I went through medical school, 90 to 94. And, I didn't, my match is through the military, cause I was a front loader. So before I started medical school, I went up to Newport News, Rhode Island, through what we call officer impersonation school, which is actually officer indoctrination school. Um, that was a trip, because I was what we call a front loader. So I hadn't even started medical school yet. And here we are, we're up there. It's a 6-week block. And at that point, what the Navy does is it's essentially teach you how to put on a uniform, rank and file, understand how the military code works, what's going on, what your role is, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm in there with a bunch of, having just finished first, in some cases, even second year med school. And these guys are going through the same process. And I kept thinking, well, these guys are a couple years ahead of me. So I sort of, I defer to their seniority, as it were. And come to find out that most of these guys were more clueless about the Navy than I was clueless about medicine. We had one guy in particular that I think ended up going into pathology, which was perfect. He, when you get your uniforms, the old uniforms in the Navy were called Certified Navy Twill, CNT, which is just an obfuscated way of saying polyester, because that's what it is. Now, you can wear that polyester in training, and you can wear that polyester stateside. You can't wear it on a ship because polyester melts. That's a no-go, right? So deployed, you ain't wearing anything polyester. But there was one guy in particular, and of course, I had been in the marching band in high school, on the drum line, so I knew how to march. So me and another colleague were tasked by the boss to say, okay, you're going to teach your platoon how to march. That was fun. And then otherwise, good order and discipline. Well, there's this guy that went into pathology. I swear, his uniform, I don't think there was a spot on that uniform bigger than a postage stamp that didn't have a wrinkle on it. It looked like it had been wadded up super tight, wetted, and stuck in a closet for a month. And this guy's supposed to stand inspection. I thought, okay. What that taught me was a couple things. Number one, pay attention to detail and do what they ask you to do. They're not asking you to give up a kidney. Make your bed. Clean up your stuff. Square your act away, right? Good life lessons no matter what you're doing. And it also taught me that there are those that you think are better than you who may be struggling a lot worse than you are. Like, you may be farther ahead than you think you are. It's all relative. Put your nose to the grindstone and do the job, and everything will be fine. And so it was a fun experience. But so, when you're going through the match in the military, you get matched up before the main match day. So match day for me and in medical school was kind of an anticlimactic thing. It was just an excuse for everybody to have a party, because everybody else had found out what they're going to do. I already knew. I was going to San Diego for a year to do surgery. And so this is 95. At that point, the training paradigm was, you're going to do a year of internship, and then you're going to go to the fleet, and you're going to be out there as a general medical officer for anywhere from 2 years to 3 years to longer, depending on what you decide to do operationally. And then you're going to come back to do training, based on how you do out in the fleet. So I did 2 years on an aircraft carrier, USS Kitty Hawk, out of San Diego. and loved every minute of it. People used to ask me, were you bothered by the fact that it was 2 years out of your life that, you're not going to get back as far as your training? And I said, actually, it was 2 years out of my life to be a human being, learn how to actually act like an officer and an adult, see a heck of a lot of the world, really experience what I think is long lost today in our society, which is understanding that as a team we can do anything. But when everybody's sniping at everybody else, and it's just self destructive. I watched a team of what I thought were amazing professionals from the age of 17 all the way up to the skipper, who was, at that point was in his late 40s, early 50s, do incredible things in incredible circumstances as a team. And so it was a good experience. So,
What's the furthest you ever got away from the US on the boat?
oh, no, we were I was over in the Middle East, floating in the Persian Gulf for a while. And then, at that time, of course, this is pre 9/11. So there was still a little bit of a good time aspect to being in the Navy. If you could get it, the idea was if you're going to deploy, a lot of times when you deploy, you do the job as a carrier, you're going to launch, launch aircraft off the pointy end to go do job and then come back and keep on going.
So you were probably on the now famous stretch of Hormuz. Did you ever go through
Oh
that?
yeah, I've been through it. I've been through the strait 3 or 4 times. And it's, you know, it, it's hard to describe to people, what it's like over there. But it was a great experience as far as that was concerned. So we did that, and then we cruised getting back to your question about how far away we got. We went from there through the Indian Ocean all the way down to Hobart, Tasmania, south of Australia, and then it's been 5 days in Hobart, which was incredible. Got a chance to have dinner with the Hobart Medical Society. Our entire department was invited, and I mean, just cool. Just a lot of those kind of experiences that you don't get elsewhere, and a chance to meet other people from these other cultures and whatnot. And then we actually stopped in Perth first for 5 days. Then we went around to Hobart, Tasmania, then up and through the Coral Sea, and we crossed the international date line at the equator. So we went through the shellback ceremony. I don't know, most people who don't have any family with a background in Navy don't know what that is. So when you cross the equator, it's a big deal. Crossing the equator is how you join, to become a shellback, which is a point of seniority, of pride, of whatnot, to say, look, I've been there, done that, I've been around, and it's a huge hazing opportunity. So if you're a first timer going across the line, as it were, you're a wog. You're lower than low. So they spend an entire 24 hours. They get you up early and they just haze you all day. I blew noxious looking stuff out of the tie downs up on the flight deck, doing this kind of stuff. I scrubbed toilets with a toothbrush. They made us dive through this blivet full of God knows stuff coming out of the kitchen. It was pretty, it was an interesting experience. But you finish the day with what they call a steel beach picnic. So the whole back end of the ship up on the flight deck is just one big giant barbecue. And then they would drop, depending on where you are, we would drop the elevators down, and they would post sentries on the deck elevators where you raise and lower aircraft, and guys would jump off of that into the sea, and they'd post guys out there with weapons because if there's any sharks, we wanted to make sure we had coverage. I mean, you're in the middle of the
Oh
coral
Did that
sea.
ever
shit.
happen? Yeah.
We saw a couple sharks, but they left everybody alone.
Yeah.
They're,
Oh
I mean,
shit.
yeah, they're not worried. I think they're more worried about this giant piece of metal in the middle of their home than they are a bunch of guys jumping off and getting back up. Um, but yeah, then came back and did residency in San Diego. Worst year of my life was my second year of residency, because I was you when you go straight through, you get corporate knowledge, right? You learn the computer system, you learn who to call to hack to get that study got you get the study result back quick, all that. You lose all that. 2 years in the fleet, you come back, everything's different. All these people moved on, the computer system changed. I've never been so fatigued and felt so stupid and worthless to anybody in my entire life. So it was a rite of passage, needless to say. But finished residency in general surgery, and to as we talk about how do you decide you want to do vascular surgery, at that point it was a 5 and 2. There was no 0 5 programs, and I remember being a junior on the vascular service. I hated all the vascular surgeons because they were assholes, because they hated their lives. and they hated the practice because I mean, I remember walking on the ward and there's like 45 people just, languishing on the ward with their long leg incisions and 80 million staples and all this stuff because there was no endovascular back then, right? It was, you got a problem, you're going to get a knife and you're going to open it and you're going to do it. And I remember telling a colleague, I said, you'd have to be an idiot to want to do this for the rest of your life. Who would want to do this? Right. So that's 97. But I remember the thing that inspired me to want to do it was one of my mentors who was former Navy, who was then in private. We used to rotate out of the Naval Hospital in town to a private group that really is where you learned how to operate because you're working with a bunch of very slick, very accomplished private guys doing a lot of good general surgery and some vascular surgery as well. And it was like a kid in a candy store. The third and fourth year, you'd walk, you made all the rounds on the patients. You try to beat the staff guy to make the rounds because it's a private deal and that's what they do. And I'd look at the schedule. And if you're the senior guy, you say, I'm going to do these cases. The junior guy is going to do these cases and you're off to the races. And you do 3, 4 great cases in a day. And I learned that, the things that took 4 hours in the, under training in the Naval Hospital out in the real world took an hour and a half. Right. And the kind of disjointed ways that I had seen things academically from a vascular perspective, I watched my mentor do them in private practice, and Mike Zeiss was a stud. And he made it reproducible and he made it understandable and enjoyable. And one of the things he told me is he said, the reason that I went into vascular is because I felt like it was a body of knowledge that I could wrap my mind around fully to both understand and then execute it. And then focus on that execution and doing it as well and as efficiently as I possibly could for the best possible outcomes. And of course, at that point, I was like, okay, no, I'll do it. No, I like this. This works for
He
me.
probably made surgery look easy, didn't he?
He did. Well, all the private guys did, but it also is one of those things that I don't think people understand in training anymore. If you hold people to 110% expectation and they deliver 95, they still come out ahead because if you only expected 100, they were likely going to give you 85, And so they drew that out of me to make me a better surgeon. So I walk away from that. And I remember too in fellowship, the first rupture that I did with the junior fellow, and I took him through the rupture, and the patient did great. Like it was just boom, 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 boom. We just got it done, and it was great. And I thought, wow, I can really do this. I got a shot at this. I'm not going to go out there and fall flat on my face. And I enjoyed the work. And back then there was no 80-hour work week restrictions and training, so I just lived at the hospital. That's why my ex-wife is my ex-wife. Because I was never home and I was having more fun than she'd ever seen, and she couldn't understand that. But having said that, I finished residency. You have to do another. I had to do another tour. I did interview for all the fellowships, and which is fun unto itself. There's great stories to that. I remember the first time that I interviewed, every time I did an interview, I was in service dress blues. So basically, I'm in a formal uniform. Got the medals on your chest, got the white hat, got the stripes on your sleeves, etc. And the reason I did that was because I said, look, I'm in the Navy, I'm free. Hire me, I'm free. And I had 3 different programs try to offer me a position for the next year outside the match. But Uncle Sam wasn't having that. And I told him, I said, look, I don't think I'm going to make that happen. And I didn't. I ended up spending a year on the USS Constellation, which was the sister ship of the Kitty Hawk, so another aircraft carrier. And I flew over to Hong Kong to meet the ship because they were actually coming back from deployment. And they had about another month, 6 weeks that we were going to be deployed coming back. So I met them in Hong Kong. We sail out of Hong Kong. We get to Oahu. And, the other thing most people don't realize is on these tours that, especially on a carrier, we do what's called tiger cruises. So tigers are family members that are not affiliated with the Navy at all, but that you bring on board and you host them to show them what it's like to live in the machine and do your job. It can't be your girlfriend, can't be your wife, but it can be other family members. And so, I brought my old man on board, and who's also a pilot, and we offload about 1,500 of our active duty because at that point we are winding down, right? We're on our way back home. And when you come into port, You don't come into port back in the United States with a full carrier full of aircraft. The aircraft have already gone. The air wing is going back to where it's stationed. They are augmented to the ship, but the ship's company is about 2,500 people. The air wing brings the other 2,500. That's the 5,000 that you're sending over to do the job of projecting power. So we had offloaded a lot of aircraft. We had already offloaded all of our bombs and bullets because that's done at sea. You don't never do that in port. And that was being transferred then to another carrier that was headed over. We come out of Oahu, and we left Oahu on September 9th. And then the morning of September 11th, I woke up and I walk out of my stateroom. My dad's in my stateroom as well. I'm on a cot. He's in my rack. And I walk out and I hear the old man on the 1MC, the overhead, talking about, well, I'm sure you guys have heard about such and such and so and so. And I thought he was making a joke like, oh, well, such and so and so has happened. So we're going to take our tigers and we're going to go fight the ship, tongue in cheek sort of thing. He kept talking and he wasn't funny. And I really didn't like what he was saying. And then finally, it kicked in my mind. I stepped back into my stateroom, turned around, turned the TV on in the room. My dad's literally at the mirror shaving, and we see a rebroadcast because we're hours back from New York time. We see the second plane hit the tower, and he looked at me and I looked at him and I said, "Don't go anywhere." He said, "Holy shit!" I said, "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back." Threw on a uniform and I hauled ass down to medical and I said, "What are we doing?" He said, "There's going to be a meeting in the wardroom in about an hour." And so we vacillated because we're in the middle of the Pacific, halfway home between Oahu and San Diego. What are we going to do? Are we going to go back and dump the tigers off and try to get our people back? That's going to be impossible. All the aircraft, nothing's flying, right? 9/11, everything shuts down.
How many tigers would you usually have on the ship when this was happening?
About 1,500.
1,500 people that were not necessarily trained? They were just kind of touring?
They're there to observe. They're just watching us do what we do coming home. So, fast forward an extra day. Ultimately, we came home to San Diego on the 13th. And so we decided, no, we're going to go, at fairly short notice, we were told we're going in. Okay, fine. Normally when the carrier comes home from a deployment, it's a big to-do. Huge party on the pier, thousands of family members, bunting, banners, balloons, the whole regalia, right? We cruise into San Diego at about 7:30 at night as the sun is setting to the escort of about 4 different 50 cal mounted rib boats with nothing moving in the bay, nothing flying in the sky, to an empty pier. And I had never been so angry in my entire life because I felt like these kids who spent the last 6, 7 months, maybe longer, a year or better, training to then go and actually deploy and do the job, then come back, and this is what they're given as a welcome home. We sneak in like thieves in the night. I literally called my ex-wife, she was still my wife at the point, and I called her from the cell phone. We were close to point. I said, "Get in a car, drive down, be there at such and such a time. It's all I can tell you." She said, "Okay." And I hung up. And so she met me at the pier. And I threw my stuff in the car and we drove home. And yeah, it was surreal. It truly was surreal.
At what point in time do you have to deploy to Iraq?
So that came later. So when I got done with the Constellation, I already had orders to go to fellowship. So I was already on my way to Kentucky to fellowship at the University of Kentucky.
But I would think that all bets are off. I mean, if you're in the middle of warfare, I mean, the U.S. has been just attacked. Potentially, they can pull you back or no?
They can. Needs of the Navy will always dictate. The military is going to do what they need to do. But at that point, I was not a critical element that couldn't otherwise be replaced in usual rotation. So I did my fellowship in Kentucky for 2 years and then went to Portsmouth Naval Hospital, where I was there for 5 years to finish out basically my obligated service and dragged general surgery residents kicking and screaming through vascular surgery as best I could. Some loved it, some hated it. It was a mixed bag. But in the middle of that, in 2007, during the surge in Anbar is when I deployed to Iraq. So I was a director of surgical services for a hospital. We were what's called a level 2 hospital. So level 1 is literally at the scene. That's usually corpsmen, occasionally you get a forward deployed operating base that will have, a surgeon to it. My wife did that in Afghanistan. But we were at Al Taqaddum Air Base, which is just north of Lake Habaniya, about halfway between Ramadi and Fallujah. Two very bad places to be. And we would get these patients that would come in from the helo. And the helo, I mean, the flight line was literally right next to our hospital, which looked like a giant, we called it the Twinkie. It was a huge Quonset hut. Quonset's one of those sort of those corrugated half circle type, enclosures that are flat on both ends. So it looked like a giant Twinkie because it was painted yellow. They would park on the flight line. They would put the patient on a gator, on a 4-wheel ATV, and literally bring them over from the flight line behind these giant barriers, strip them naked outside in the sun, and then bring them in. And everybody says, well, why did they do that? I said, well, so here's how this went. So we got into Anbar and into Al Taqaddum at the very end of February 2007 and the beginning of March. We turned over with the previous crew. And so they're kind of giving us a go by about how they do things and processes and procedures and how to communicate down range, et cetera, and how to send things as far as records and whatnot, and just what the usual protocol was to take care of patients. Because, in most cases, the idea was to get a patient off the helo into our place, triaged, operated on, wrapped up, and back on a helo within about 90 minutes to 120 minutes. We wanted them the hell out of there.
And then you would send them to Germany after that?
Usually they'll go to Balad. They would usually go to Balad first. Balad was a very large air base north of us that had subspecialty care. So there were actually vascular surgical capabilities with imaging and so forth. My CAT scanner was a stuffed cat that we would wave over the patient. Okay, CAT scan's done. Let's go to the OR. Let's go operate. Hey, diddle diddle, straight down the middle. That's the way you did it, right? It's just grab a Bard Parker and let's go to town. Patient's got a gunshot. Well, we don't have time to play games. That's what we're going to do. We did have ultrasound, but
So was your job? I was about to ask. So gunshot wound to the femoral artery, transection, bleeding all over the place, patient in shock. Would you just kind of open, clamp, suture, tie, whatever, and then send the leg ischemic to a bypass up there? Or would you actually do the bypass or shunt or something and then send over?
yeah, typically we would shunt because I knew that if I get them back on the helo and I would give them a slug of heparin upstream, downstream, even if they had other associated injuries, I could usually lace them enough that I could then get them on a helo knowing that within an hour, they're going to be in Balad. They're going to know what we've got because we're going to mark all over the patient with marks a lot, Sharpie markers over the yellow drape and everything else. If we've got an open belly, which in many cases we would literally write on the patient exactly what was going on. And then that along with paperwork that was then transmitted securely through a cyberlink to Balad so that they knew what they were up against. But yeah, I ended up shunting a number of patients.
We used to have military guys come to Philly to Temple because we used to get on a Saturday between 10 and 20 gunshot wounds on any Saturday.
Oh, you mean come to train for that?
To train, yeah, for that before they would go off to Iraq. They would come train with us. So it was kind of crazy.
I mean, I remember even in San Jose, Costa Rica, obviously not great, but we would have a fair amount of vascular knife wounds and shots. But I remember at some point I was like really interested in trauma. Thank
Me
God
too.
that
Yeah.
thank God
No.
that moved away. But I
Yeah.
had connected with some guys in Colombia, and I was going to go to Colombia to do some training because they still, unfortunately, have a ton of these
Yeah.
wounds.
My last death in trauma, I remember it was yesterday. This guy came in, and at that point, it was chief year. We've done so much trauma. So I just kind of you get multiple gunshot wounds, unstable on the beeper, and you kind of just walk down, 15 minutes. So you're there, and the guy looks at me and tells me, "Man, I'm gonna die." And I'm like, "No, you're not gonna die. You'll be fine." It seemed like it was a low caliber wound, bullet. So we took him to the CAT scanner and then took him upstairs. And we go in the belly, it's just bleeding. We try to control above, below. And one moment and 1 second, and we couldn't tell where it was coming from. It went right through the confluence of the renal veins and the inferior vena cava. So it was bleeding
Ah,
from 4 different sides. That's why we couldn't, like, we would get one controlled,
those were
then
the
the
worst.
major. Those were the
The
worst. And
worst.
there was like one moment where I look back and I was like, that was the clue. It was like some little bit of shiny silver skin and like the kidneys. And I was like, that was the moment I would have picked it up. But I remember that to that day. It's like the last
Well,
gunshot wound patient that I had
I
that
mean,
died.
the one I lost was a GSW that went into the suprahepatic veins, and that
Yeah,
hole is horrible back there, you
that's
know.
horrible. Yeah.
So I do remember, like, you know, the first time you'd rip that belly open and there was blood over it, right? And so
Yeah.
you're like, pack, 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 pack,
Yeah.
pack, laps, 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 and you're just fucking putting laps all over because you
Yeah.
don't know where the bleeding is, right? So you pack, pack, pack,
Yeah.
pack, pack, pack. So now you have whatever, 10, 15 laps in there, and you start one at a time. Okay, one at a time,
Hmm.
and you pick them up, pick them up, pick them up, and then sometimes it would just fucking come all the way up,
Yeah.
and it was the bad time when it was like dark blood because
Oh yeah, that's
oh
the worst. That's
fuck,
yeah.
because
Fuck.
it's
Yeah.
IVC.
Yeah.
Those tears are horrible. It's so hard to suture. Everything
Yeah.
tears. You put one
There's
here, or you're pulling. Oh, I remember that. That was a bad. We lost you there for a quick second, but we just kept talking about her. You're giving us PTSD of our trauma,
PTSD about
vascular
trauma
trauma
rotation.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a little of that coming back from Iraq as well. I will tell you. You. I used to joke with people. I say, I was the director of surgical services, but I was really kind of the seeing eye surgeon for the rest of my general surgery colleagues, because a patient would come in with a couple of blasted extremities, and they're just sort of looking at this mess, and then they look at me like, well, where's the blood supply? And it's up to us to kind of go, we know the anatomy here and here. Okay, you need to deal with here and here. They had a big bad guy that ended up in the OR that had a shrapnel wound to the neck, and they were doing a neck exploration. And I remember this was as we were doing the original turnover. So the old crew was working on this. And then I get this call, hey, can you come into room 1? Because we had our OR we had 3 ORs. And we had a C-arm capability for bone, but it was not enough that we could do anything else. And I wouldn't even think about it from an endovascular standpoint. There's no product in the field for that. Um, but he said, can you come into room 1? And I said, sure. And they were doing this neck exploration. And of course, you know how it is. When you get asked to come in for help, first thing I always do is like, hey, what's up, guys? Try to keep it light. They're stressed out enough, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of, and I try to tell my junior colleagues this. When you get a phone call to come fix a problem, don't walk in pissed off. It's not,
Yeah.
they didn't do it on
Yeah.
purpose. Okay. They're looking
Yeah.
for your help. So to be helpful, so I came in there and they're doing this exploration. I'm like, okay. And they're through this tiny little incision. I'm like, all right. So I scrub in. I'm like, can we extend this? Just pretend this is we're doing a carotid. Okay. And so it was up and down, big incision, get in there. And he'd gone through and through the jug. And that was easy to control. Put a stitch in the front, roll it over, put a stitch in the back, or I'd get it the hell out of the way. Through and through the carotid, just below the bifurcation across kind of the lateral edge of the common. It was a small, thankfully, it was a small hole. I think he would have just bled out, but there was definitely a defect there that we repaired. And then dig underneath that. And he actually had a vert injury. And so only thing I could do at that point was just throw stitches posteriorly there, right in that fashion, and just tie it off.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's damage,
Yeah.
it's done. Nobody's going to fix it anyway. It is what it is. But just being systematic about it. Having said
Yeah.
that,
Nick is
a carotid
Nick is
injury
bad.
was when I realized like vascular surgeons are pretty cool, because we were doing trauma. This guy had been stabbed in the neck, the same thing, and we were kind of floundering. So we call it trauma surgeon. I remember Dr. Van Bemelen, this guy from like the Netherlands. I don't know how the hell he ended up in North Philadelphia. But he grabs like a mayo, doesn't say shit, just like grabs a mayo and the bakey and fucking like dissects it beautifully in like 3 seconds and like controls it. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy? And then repairs it, walks out like barely. And he used to never talk. He would just, and I kind of like took that from him. When he wanted a scissor, he would just go like that or just go like that. And then the nurse would know. And it was just like the coolest thing. I was like, God, I like this guy.
just keep everything easy and mellow. It's like we didn't get in, we
Yeah,
got invited to the party. We didn't want to be here, but it is what it is.
exactly.
Nicks are so bad. Nicks are so bad because I remember one man, we could just say stories and stories here for hours, huh?
Yeah.
But but when it hits like airway and it hits
Oh,
esophagus too, those are bad, right? Because you get
yeah.
there, you do the vascular stuff, and the guy's gonna be alive, but then managing,
It's gonna be
an
swimming in spit.
esophageal,
Yeah.
ostomy, and the trach. And I remember this young guy just essentially go like sarcopenic, through like months in the ICU till he passed. I always look back and I was like, if I was him, I would have probably wished to die the day I died, than go through a complex gunshot wound to the neck that has multiple systems, and it's such a tough place to operate in. Anyway, you were gonna say something, Eric?
Well, no, I think the hardest part about being over there was the fact that, when you do trauma in the States, and it sounds insensitive, but all of us inside this know it's true. You become a little bit insensate to the population of patients that are typically trauma patients. They're gangbangers, they're quote dirt bags, they're this, they're that. The tragedies when the soccer mom gets whacked by somebody else who was drunk and then kills her and the kid in the car and all that jazz. Well, over there, it's all different because unless it's one of the bad guys, which we would, you could always tell who the bad guys were when they came in because their heads were all wrapped in gauze so they couldn't see anything. We didn't want them seeing anything inside of our organization at all. We didn't want to see them rooms, nothing. They were always kept with a gauze wrap around the upper part of their head across their eyes. And then in some cases, depending on what was going on, they would wrap their hands as well. But um, when it wasn't the bad guys, it was some 19-year-old Marine. And you can't separate yourself from that. The emotional aspects of that are pretty profound, and they linger. And I mean, I still have some of those ghosts cruising around that come back and haunt me every now and again. And people say, "What do you wish you hadn't gone over there?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm very grateful for the fact that I was actually assigned to go over there and the experience that I had." Um, I've seen things done to people that are absolutely horrific. The things that even describing, I think, would haunt many listeners, and to be in the middle of it is pretty incredible. But you just do the job. My goal was to make sure that kid didn't go out the backside of our shock trauma platoon covered in a flag. And when they did, it wasn't like they just sort of, how it is, when they in the trauma bay, okay, you pronounce them and then you got to walk out and do paperwork and somehow the body disappears and they go and they do whatever they do and you're not involved. When you're in the shock trauma platoon, which is kind of the ER part of the hospital and then ultimately connect to the OR, when they pass, we man the rails. So, all of us would line the hallway and that person would be brought out under a flag drape, cover, and then taken over to the morgue. And, it rattles your cage, man. You don't like it. And you get real pissed. Like, why the hell are we here doing this? And how the hell did this happen? And you could get into we could wax philosophic about the whys and wherefores and all this kind of stuff. My job was to do my job, and that was saving lives. Get my Marines home. And they are my Marines. I own them. I feel personally responsible for them. And, kids like Lance Corporal Windsor, whose name and face I will never forget, who went out under a flag. The things that I do today, I do in honor of kids like him because it matters.
And I think that this is why these stories matter, and like where we get to talk about them, because you know it's not a video game. It's not like lackadaisy, when especially like now, we're whatever, May 2026, where things can go anywhere. These there will be more Corporal Smith Johnson, and you know if we go down a certain path, and that's reality. And yeah, I mean, it's a tragedy. So we get to talk about it. We get to to tell experiences so that people say like, okay, this means something, and you better know why you're doing things when you do them, because you're affecting a lot of people's lives.
Sure. So I'll tell you quickly, because like you said, Miguel, we could talk for hours about this stuff. Um, I'll tell you two stories. I'll tell you a really good one and a really bad one. Let's start with, how should we start? Um, so the I'll tell you, it's not so really good one. It was kind of more funny than anything else. I think the worst day that I had there was in dealing with a patient. There was a sniper in the region, and we were getting kids that were coming. So this kid comes to us, Marine. He was getting his fucking hair cut and gets hit with a bullet because some sniper figures out how to get through, and it shot him right in the porta hepatis. I mean, just right in the worst possible place. And I remember standing there, and we're in the operating room, and we've done all the things we can do. We've stuffed, laps and all that. We put Foley's in holes and blown them up to try to get some kind of control to see something so we could do something. And it wasn't likely going to work. And I remember standing there as we finally said, this is it. I think we're going to have to just stop, because we're going to run out of resources and we can't afford to do that. So the commander of the Marine detachment, a very hard charging, very tough as nails looking lieutenant colonel, um, you know, gray shock of hair, super short, just that kind. He looked like the penultimate Marine, stood there holding that kid's hand while he died and weeping. So that was about the funny one. So when we first got there, needless to say, when we left that operating room, I heard the colonel say, "That's it. I'm done. This fucker's dead." And within 2 days, they found the sniper. I mean, they did a full on, I mean, all hell descended in that region. And that guy was found and eliminated. So when we first got there, we were operating on sawhorses with litters. Think about that. You know what a sawhorse is? Like in your garage, like a wooden sawhorse that you put something across. It's got two sawhorses, and they put the litter on it. That's what we had to work with. So people think operating rooms and they think all this stuff's going to be in it. We had an anesthesia machine. We did not have overhead light. All of our lights that we used, we had headlights. We would put on like camping headlights so that we could see what was going on. If there needed to be something else, a couple of guys had high-powered flashlights. They would stand behind us if we need to try to readjust. So I don't have OR lights, and I'm working on sawhorses and guys on litters. At least every day we were doing 2 or 3 cases, something was happening. During that surge, it seemed like from the time we got boots on the ground in Kuwait and then flying into Iraq in the beginning of March until April, about mid-April, it was balls to the wall. I mean, and so it's me and 3 other general surgeons, 2 anesthesiologists, and an orthopedic surgeon. And I'm looking at these guys, and they're haggard. I mean, we're getting our asses kicked. And I'm thinking, how are we going to keep doing this? How long are we going to keep going? Because it just didn't stop. And then right about mid to the end of May, it's like a switch flipped. Somehow in that area, they were able to sort of reach out and win the hearts and minds and get these guys to understand, look, if we get these bad guys out of your communities, your kids can play in the streets again. They can go to school. They can have commerce. You could live your lives like normal. Help us get rid of these people. And once they did that, then we actually started making some advancement. But up to that time, it was pretty crazy. And the resources were tough. And I kept thinking, we got to get rid of these litters. And they make OR tables that I know they got OR tables that we can get our hands on somehow. So the Vice Commandant of the Marine Corps comes for a tour. Okay. 4-star general. Our 1-stars in company with him. And he gets a tour of the shock trauma platoon of our hospital. And we're standing there, and we stand to greet him. And since I'm the director of surgical services, they expect me to be there to do part of this as far as the greeting party. We kind of give the guy a tour. My colleague shows them the shock trauma, the ER area. We had 8 beds up in the front in the ER to do what we needed to do. And then the 4 ORs. And when we finally got done, he looked at me and he said, "Doctor, what do you need? What can I give you?" I said, "Sir," I said, "I need OR lights and I need OR tables. I need 4 and 4. That's it." I'm pretty sure the 1-star, if if uh if he could have throttled me at that moment, he probably would have. But I was going to use whatever capital I could. 3 weeks later, we got OR tables and no OR lights and had them mounted. Then we were off to the races at that point. But we could finally have a formal OR that actually was not something cobbled together. And if anybody tells you that whole blood isn't the elixir of life, they have no idea what they're talking about. I watched this kid try to die on us, and they activated the walking blood. And when you activate the walking blood bank, what you got to understand is that every Marine knows what his blood type is. I mean, it's like in his brain. It has been beaten into it by his direct drill instructor, I'm sure, from the time he was a little bitty. And so when they call for blood, we're in this giant air base, and it's about 200 yards from where most of the housing is for us relative to where the shock trauma platoon is, et cetera. And they would activate the walking blood bank, and you'd see Marines running at a full sprint, dozens of them, to converge on our shock trauma platoon. And we got to the point where we could basically activate the walking blood bank, and we had whole blood available to us in 25 minutes. I mean, just boom, 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 boom. Amazing. I mean, it truly is the elixir of life. We would cross match them, make sure that it was right, and then give the blood. And it fixed everything. Like the physiology is completely different. You know how it is when you're outside the box? When they're coagulopathic and you're losing and they're, shoving the products in them. But whole blood, you start that whole blood. And I mean, I watched a kid go from 0 to hero like that. It was unbelievable. I literally was absolutely floored. And then I saw it happen over and over after that.
All right, gents. I think that we spent the hour telling stories, which was awesome. I love it.
Well,
We still didn't get to your entrepreneurial journey.
no, we're not
Yeah,
even halfway there because
I know.
we
Yeah.
we we need to but you know what, out of actually absolute respect to a time of your life, and to something that means a lot, and that right now it's ever so present, with what we're going through, and so there's no reason to speed through it. And so we normally do batch recordings every 8 weeks. I'd love to just write you down for the next one, and within the next 2 months we can drop the second part, and we could just make it a second part where, essentially, I'd love to understand the path after, um, how you got to this then founder level entrepreneur, side of you, um, and then also understanding what you're up to doing locums, which again I think more and more of us are loving that freedom that comes with that lifestyle. So anyway, and and I don't know. Any final words there, Aaron? Want to give you the floor.
What people need to understand, given our current situation in the Middle East, is that they need to take all of their preconceived notions about how you interact with another human being that and park it. They are not us, and we are not them. And their cultural norms, mores, and differences are vastly different than ours. And so it, you're it, people keep saying, "Oh, they're stalling, and wow, well, we're not going to get ahead." It's about mindset and understanding what that mindset is for those folks, and that's centuries of culture. You're not just going to suddenly flip that switch and change it. So I think I would just urge anybody that's all wrapped up about the gas prices and this and that. This, chill out. This too shall pass. Give it some time. Let's let it play. We win with a long game. We win with a long game. As far as America is concerned, I think we win with a long game. And if everybody else wants to talk politics and all that, they can have it. I'm not interested. But as far as just dealing with understanding the psychology of that culture versus ours. They're very different. And so that negotiation is not simply just like you and I having a conversation over, well, I want this, I want this latte and you want that latte.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, if anything, the one I would say glimmer of hope here, which is kind of really weird way to put it, but historically, we have lost less and less and less good men. I want to say from World War I, where I want to say that it was some horrible number in the 500,000 to 600,000 to I want to say 300 or so accounted for in the Gulf War. So we're definitely hopefully getting better at protecting our people. And I would say that on both ends, right? Humans, when I say people, is humans, and I love the situation with the guys that just went up to the moon and said, you know what, we're in this beautiful in this beautiful craft in the middle of nothing, where we have everything, right? We have food and water and oxygen. Um, and I'd like to think that there's a way forward for us to keep humanity sane and alive and keep developing. But we will continue to wish for that. All right, Aaron,
All
we
right.
look forward to having another conversation and understanding what you're up to with this awesome, cool technology. And I will say one last thing, fellas, look at my eyes. Look at how beautiful
They
after my.
they still look shitty, bro.
No,
Yeah.
they don't.
They
Look,
still that
way
right eye
better.
looks like somebody punched you in the face.
Way
Gosh,
All right,
better.
guys.
if I was there, I'd give you a big
L'Oreal,
kiss, man.
Vamos. Yeah.
L'Oreal for men. We're looking for
Jesus.
sponsors.
All
Bye
right.
bye,
And with
guys. Have a
that,
blessed day.
here's the wrap.